Hey folks, I have been keeping my eye out for new books published by independent publishers and university presses, and I have a great list of new books published in October 2023 to share with you today. This list is a little bit shorter than some of these videos have been getting lately, and there's a reason for that. And I'll share that reason with you at the end. So stick around. Most of these books on this list are fiction because that's kind of where my reading tastes and reading knowledge leans a bit. I try to include a good variety of books here, and I also try to include publishers. Most of them are from the US and Canada because I live in the US. I do try to include a few books in here and there from Australia and UK as well. And speaking of Australia, the first book I have to mention to you all is a book that was just published in Australia. It's called Edenglassie, and it was published by the University of Queensland Press, and it's by Melissa Lucashenko. This is a dual timeline epic novel that is set in Brisbane. The first timeline follows a group of Aboriginal characters who are dealing with colonial unrest in the 1800s. And the second timeline fast forwards 200 years later when a doctor and an activist are come together. Two characters, a doctor and an activist, come together to care for an elderly character and are also kind of dealing with the scars and the impact that the British colonial occupation and invasion, the impact that still has 2 centuries later. So why am I interested in this book? I'm always interested in how authors weave together dual timelines within a book. I think that's a really fun format for a novel that I particularly enjoy. And this is a particular period of history and part of the world that I would love learning more about in novel form. Also, the publisher has won the Australian Small Publisher of the Year for 3 years in a row, which I think is very cool. Speaking of interesting publishers, I want to mention Restless Books, which is a publisher in the US, and they have a line of classics that they publish. And just this October, they published Dracula, and this is an illustrated edition. So all of the classics they publish are illustrated editions, and it has introductions by Alexander Chee and Sylvia Moreno Garcia. It caught my eye because even though I have 2 editions of Dracula already, the illustrated version looks very cool. I think one of the big reasons for collecting multiple editions of classics is the different introductions. These are 2 authors that I greatly admire, and I think it would be fun to see their introduction to this classic. October was the month that How to Build a Boat was published in North America. So How to Build a Boat was recently longlisted for the 2023 Booker Prize, and it's published by Biblioasis, which is a Canadian publisher. And there's a lot of content online about this book since it was longlisted for a very popular literary prize. So I won't go into the summary here. You can see a whole number of summaries for this book out there on the YouTubes. From Graywolf is a collection of linked short stories called Company, and it's by Shannon Sanders. And again, this is a collection of linked stories following one family, the Collins family, over many decades and following them along the East Coast of the United States. The cool thing about this collection is that each story in the collection includes one moment where a guest arrives at a character's home. So hence the title Company. And I think that is a very cool premise for a collection of linked stories. So what caught my eye was, first of all, that premise for the linked stories, but then also Graywolf publishes some of my very, very favorite short story collections. So I always think it's worth checking out their story collections. Next up is a memoir, what's called a memoir in essays called The Loneliness Files. And this is by Athena Dixon, and it's published by Tin House. And these essays pack a real punch. The blurb for this book makes a big deal of sharing that Athena Dixon is a middle-aged woman living alone without children or pets, working from home living hundreds of miles from her family, kind of becomes obsessed with the idea of dying alone. And so several of these essays are actually the author's research and obsession with stories of women who died alone, and including one woman who died alone and nobody missed her. They didn't find her body for years because nobody noticed that she was missing. A woman in her 30s. This was a young woman. It gets under your skin. I'll just say that. These essays get under your skin, provoke a lot of existential fears for sure, but there's also like a lot of humor and warmth and thoughtfulness in these essays as well. I don't usually have or like accept advanced reader copies of books because I can't handle the numbers coming through the door. I just don't have the space or the time. The one exception is Tin House, which is, it's a little bit different of a situation because I receive some advanced reader copies from Tin House because I am a patron through Patreon of a podcast called Between the Covers. And one of the levels of David Naiman's Patreon membership is receiving ARCs from Tin House because the podcast is affiliated with Tin House. So that is the one exception of ARCs coming through my door is through this Patreon membership level that I belong to. And that is why this fantastic collection of essays came into my hands. From New York Review Books, and I always want to say New York Review of Books because that's the journal that reviews the books. But the publishing part is called, I believe, doesn't have the word of, and it's just New York Review Books. And I find that hard to say. Anyway, the book is called Lies and Sorcery, and the author is Elsa Morante, and it's translated from Italian by Jenny McPhee. And this is a sprawling 800-page novel that was written during World War II when the author, who was half Jewish, was living in hiding. The novel is set in Sicily and it spans the lives of 3 generations of women. The narrator is Elsa, and she is orphaned at a young age and is sent to live with a wealthy fallen woman. And when her guardian, that fallen woman, dies, Elsa attempts to uncover what she finds is the very dark history of her family. This is actually the first full English translation of this novel. An abridged version was published in English, I believe, in the 1950s, but this is the first full 800-page translation of this epic. And why did this book catch my eye? New York Review Books describes Elsa Morante as one of the great writers of the 20th century, though her work is little known in the United States. I hate when that happens. Nothing quite piques my interest than an author who is described as great but unknown. Next up from New Directions is a book called My Work. It's by Olga Ravn, and it's translated by Sophia, Hersi Smith, and Jennifer Russell. This is the story of Anna, who is feeling completely lost after the birth of her child and the family's subsequent move to snowy Stockholm. She copes with her discomfort and feeling of being lost by reading and writing. And from what I understand, this is told in alternating time frames, and it's a ferocious attempt to connect life as a mother and motherhood to life as a writer and writing, to make it into one life, one work. Motherhood, writing as one. This is from the author of The Employees, which was an existential sci-fi voyage that got a lot of praise and reviews. And what caught my eye about this book was the mix of literary forms. So this is fiction and poetry and letters. And Kate Zambrano says it is especially for mothers who long for a life of literature. And that caught my eye. From Sibylline Press is a novel called Unsettled, and it's by Patricia Reis. And this is a novel that is told, again, in 2 time periods. I sense a kind of book that I like, a novel told in 2 time periods. There's a character named Van Reinhardt, and she is clearing out her late father's belongings when she comes across a photo of her German immigrant ancestors. And she begins to dig into the complex history of her family through her interest in this photo. And woven in with the story of Van's family research is the story of Van's ancestor, Kate, who endures multiple tragedies across her life and also holds a tightly kept secret. So what caught my eye about this book? The title in particular really stood out to me, actually, and especially when I read what the book was about, because it's the story of German settlers, but also the story of unsettling truths that can come to light when you start digging through family history. From Fomite Press is a novel called Conch Pearl, and it's by Julie E. Justicz. Conch Pearl opens with a 12-year-old girl who is alone on a boat off the coast of Grand Bahama while a storm rages around her. The novel is set in 1970s Bahamas and follows 12-year-old Dee Dee, who is a white English girl who is seeking friendship and belonging among many residents of her community on the island. But not all of those friendships that she seeks out prove to be particularly safe friendships, you find out. The thing that caught my eye was the description that there are some fantastic big twists at the end. Another from New York Review Books is My Death by Lisa Tuttle, and this is about an unnamed writer who attempts to reignite her passion for writing after the death of her husband by embarking on a biography of an artist and a writer named Helen Ralston. Helen Ralston's most radical painting, which was called My Death, is so unsettling that it can't even be shown in public. So as this unnamed narrator, I think, interviews Ralston for this biography, the narrator discovers strange similarities between Ralston's life and her own. Why this book caught my eye? Neil Gaiman sold it to me when he said that Lisa Tuttle is the finest practitioner of unsettling fiction writing today, and then when he added, she is the kind of writer that somebody really should have warned you about. From Milkweed is a novel called The Last Language by Jennifer Du Bois, and it sounds like it could be a little divisive, actually. That's why it caught my eye. I'll tell you that first. This is the story of a young mother and recent widow named Angela, who finds herself losing her position in graduate school and working as a speech pathologist in a center for patients who are nonverbal. So Angela begins to work with this experimental therapy and like speech therapy, and she, through working with this new, I think it's some sort of equipment, through this new experiment, she befriends one of the patients, a young 28-year-old man named Sam, who for most of his life has been both nonverbal and pretty much immobile as well. So we learn from Angela, who is narrating this book from prison, that Sam can communicate through this new therapy and learn and is able to communicate with Angela through the equipment, and their relationship eventually turns intimate. It's described as a deep exploration of language and humanity and morality. From the feminist press is a book called None of the Above by Travis Alabanza. This is an exploration of the concept of gender in a world that is completely inflexible in its enforcement of the gender binary. This book is organized around 7 phrases that the author over their life had directed at them, various points in their life. So the phrases range from microaggressions to directly harmful phrases to actually celebratory phrases. And through these phrases, the author explores gender in a culture that sees gender as a fixed identity. Why did this catch my eye? This is described as bold and witty and engaging, and I love that the storytelling is tied to these 7 phrases, which guide the reader through Alabanza's experience as a racialized queer person. From Erewhon Books, there is a collection of stories called Jewel Box by E. Lily Yu. These are 22 strange and fable-like stories about monsters and nameless gods and unicorns roaming Central Park. Karen Joy Fowler says that they float like fairy tales and sting like bees, and Kelly Link calls them utterly beguiling. Why am I interested in this book? I always have room in my life for strange short stories. I can't really get enough of them. And I've been interested in Erewhon's books for a little while now. So they're an imprint of Kensington Books, and they publish fantasy and speculative fiction. And they're rather new. I think they've only been around for a couple years. And they have some really intriguing, fun-looking titles. From Archipelago Books is a novel called January. It's by Sarah Gallardo, and it's translated from Spanish by Frances Riddle and Maureen Shaughnessy. This is the story of 16-year-old farm worker Nefer, who lives in the Argentine Pampas region and is dealing with what the poet and essayist Eliza Gabbert, in her blurb about this book, calls the original horror story, which is unwanted pregnancy. And Nefer has no idea, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, Nefer has no idea where to turn to for help. This novel is claimed as the first Argentine novel to represent rape from the survivor's perspective, and the novel is described as scorchingly honest, musical, and radically feminist. Why this caught my eye, a viewer actually recommended this book to me in a comment on one of my videos. It has also received blurbs from writers like Samantha Schweblin, and Samantha Schweblin calls Gallardo one of her favorite writers, so this really stood out to me. From Rose Metal Press, which is another one of those publishers I've had my eye on for a while and really need to pick up a book from, is a book called The Hurricane Book, and this is by Claudia Acevedo Quiñones. And this is the author's debut. It is a collection of history and poetry and maps and dialogues and flash essays that piece together the story of the author's family alongside the story of Puerto Rico. And it is organized around 6 different hurricanes that impacted Puerto Rico between 1928 and 2017. And the themes range from personal to political to environmental, and really show how pervasive colonialism is in the lives of Puerto Ricans. Why this caught my eye, I am so excited by the idea of organizing a book around hurricanes. That is so cool and brilliant. And I'm also really interested in this exploration of family and homeland and the bonds those two things create. And the last book I will mention today is A Shining by Jan Fosse, translated by Damien Searles. This is published in the US by Transit Books. And in this very slim novel, a man is driving and he doesn't know where he's going. He finds himself stuck at the end of a lonely road and it starts to snow. And so he leaves his car and ventures out into the dark and lonely Norwegian forest. And I believe he encounters something ethereal out there in that Norwegian forest. And this is described as hypnotic, strange, and dreamlike. And why this caught my eye, I ordered this book the morning I found out that Jan Fosse won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And thank goodness, I think I caught Transit Books right before they ran out. So I now have Jan Fosse's Septology from Fitzcarraldo, which is the UK publisher of Jan Fosse, and Transit Books is then the US publisher of his work. And so I'm super excited that I'm mostly excited that I got a copy before it has any stickers on it about the Nobel Prize. So that's what gets me going, is not having stickers on the front of books. I hope some of those books sounded interesting to you and you'll check them out. And if you do, please let me know in the comments below. I usually, in the past few months, these videos have been getting longer and longer and longer because there are so many amazing books being published by independent publishers and university presses, and they all just sound so good. But these videos can't keep getting longer and longer and longer. So I've actually decided to offer a newsletter where I list out all the books that I've discovered that were published in the past month by independent publishers, university presses, small presses, and share that with you via newsletter, which I think is a bit more consumable for the average person in newsletter form, categorized by genre and country and all of that. So then these videos can be a little more focused, a little shorter of the books that really, really caught my eye. Then we can enjoy together that much longer list, which still has many amazing books. I mean, there are so many more amazing books from October that I wanted to add here that I just had to make the decision that this needs to be shorter. We are not doing any more of these 45-minute videos about books that are being published because that is overwhelming to everyone. So we're gonna do it in newsletter form, and I have left a link for signing up for the newsletter below. I hope you will check it out. If you sign up for the newsletter, you will get kind of a welcome email first, and then you'll get that first October email of the books that were published in October. And then the goal is each month you'll get another email that will list all of the books I just mentioned in the video, but then also even more books that caught my eye and hopefully will catch your eye too. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, sign up for that newsletter below and I'll see ya on YouTube. I'll see you in your email box. My name is Sarah. Talk to you later. Bye.